Africa Resilience Innovation Hub works to develop Afrocentric solutions to conflict-related shock through applied and rigorously tested research. For us, Afrocentrism means that the research agenda is set and implemented by locally based institutions and researchers who have a more immediate and direct stake in identifying appropriate and lasting solutions. The Hub applies a 6-stage policy uptake model to its research work. The first step is demand detection. Our research and solutions are demand-driven. These demands emanate from a community of demand detectors based at the local level, government, and markets. In steps 2 and 3, the demands are processed, possible solutions are preferred and tested. In step 4, solutions are referred to policy and practice practitioners for uptake. Steps 5 and 6 are solutions implementation and solutions evaluation, and the model begins again at demand detection. Going by the demands generated by governments in the region, the Hub has identified 5 research streams that are critical to the region. The first is the gender resilience seesaw. The second is ethno-customary approaches to resilience. The third is the elasticity of democracy in mosaic societies. The fourth is infrastructure and resource conflict. And the fifth is manifestations of insecurity.
The engines that drive knowledge acquisition about Africa are tragically located outside of Africa. And because of this distance decay, empirical truths are misengineered, conjuncture history manufactured, and the breeding of Afro-pessimism engineered. Discourse on state fragility in Africa is, for instance, driven by this choreographed history. It is a collection of unfortunate occurrences marinated in acidic pessimism about Africa. But the local knowledge industry in Africa is no better. To survive, its intellectuals have had to migrate to the global north. Those who choose to stay at home are forced into intellectual surrender and become prisoners of contracts from NGOs and international capital. Those who migrate to the diaspora mortgage their morality through intellectual capture. Then they return to Africa in retirement, having taught and published in the global north. Back at home, they become part of the retired intellectual litter, a group of uncelebrated intellectual giants with little recognition and acceptance from the policy sites at home.
Because of this tragedy, the policy solution seekers in Eastern Africa end up with no bankable research for 3 reasons. 1. Sometimes the intellectuals from the global north sound like intellectual tourists with no depth. Their renditions on policy issues smack of evangelism and historical condemnation. As a result, they repel the policymaker in the global south. 2. The local intellectual becomes too preoccupied with livelihoods and political correctness to offer genuine solutions. Because he or she is a prisoner of contract and not scientific conscious, his solutions regurgitate the wishes of his paymaster. 3. The captured African intellectual in living in the global north gets misplaced and lost in global discourses that have no resonance with home reality. As such, his or her solutions are full of bells and whistles, concepts and ideas cooked in the north. This is the environment in which the community of solution seekers in Africa find themselves. It is an environment of tragic irony. The solution seekers crave for sound research, as the solution givers churn out redundant knowledge. It is an intellectual double-bind. This is the knowledge anomaly that the East African Resilience Hub attempts to correct.
Because gender relations oscillate around political power shifts, gender equalities tend to be deeply political. Our resilience model of gender, therefore, conflates a gender-sensitive approach to resilience with a politically informed approach that is anchored in power fragility. We call this conflated model the gender resilience seesaw. On the one end of this resilience seesaw, we have hard insecurity and violence. Under these circumstances, men adapt and become militarized and aggressive. On their part, women become feminized and are rendered vulnerable victims of the chaotic order. On the other end of the resilience seesaw, we have soft insecurity and organic crime. Here, women become masculinized as they single-handedly navigate the socioeconomic terrain in order to fend for their families. Men, to the contrary, become feminized as they withdraw from their traditional male roles and succumb to a deficit masculinity. As a power relations shift, gender elasticity changes, with roles oscillating from one end of the spectrum to another. This resilience, sometimes positive and other times negative, is what this project will seek to unveil.
The African citizen straddles two spheres of existence: the ethno-customary sphere drawn from their traditional cultural norms, and the civic sphere, which is regulated by the state. Both spheres have their own approaches to resilience building. The ethno-customary sphere draws from indigenous socio-cultural models, while the civic sphere draws from state frameworks such as legislation and policy. Evidence shows that where applied, ethnocentric approaches have been successful in building resilience. However, their usage is limited. This is because although ethno-customary systems have community legitimacy, they have little or no civic legality. Our research will therefore do three things. First, it will identify where ethno-customary approaches to resilience have been applied and make an analysis of whether these approaches were successful in building resilience. Second, it will interrogate how ethno-customary approaches to resilience building have adapted to the changing nature of conflict in the region. This will include an interrogation of where both ethno-customary and civic mechanisms have been combined to build resilience. Finally, our research will make policy and practice recommendation on when and how ethno-customary approaches can be applied in building resilience to conflict, violence, and disaster.
Electoral processes are about the attainment of political power. In high-stake contexts, elections can be catalysts of conflict, more so where societies are divided by race, religion, language, and ethnicity. This is what we at the Hub refer to as mosaic societies. In the African context, only one model of democracy is made available: the majoritarian winner-takes-all system. We propose the adoption and application of the more inclusive and politically stable consociational model of democracy. Our research under this stream will aim to do the following: profile the different models of democracy, establish the types of division in society, and determine how these differences manifest themselves in electoral processes. And lastly, determine which model of democracy yields the highest level of electoral conflict or stability in divided societies.
The Rhodesian construction of the African state was about infrastructure. The idea was to construct a road from Cape Town to Cairo in order to facilitate illicit extraction of resources from the continent to the global north. Extraction therefore emerged as the primary DNA of the African state. As a result, extraction became a central motif in the struggle for state power. This original sin, occasioned by a Rhodesian dream for expansive infrastructure, is a fascinating area of study for the Hub, more so because of the ambitious infrastructure projects underway in Eastern Africa. Examples include the Great Millennium Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, the Lamu Gateway Project, LAPSET, and the transport corridor that will connect the western port of Banana in DRC to the eastern port of Bagamoyo in Tanzania. It is against this background that resource and infrastructure conflict has been identified as a priority research area. And on this subject, we will look at three things. One, the link between infrastructure development and contestations of power. Two, the relationship between infrastructure-related conflict and positive resilience. And three, how interactions between markets, communities, and states engender or corrode resilience in the face of massive infrastructure development.
According to the Global Terrorism Database, the number of terrorist attacks in sub-Saharan Africa rose sharply from 400 attacks in 2008 to nearly 1,200 attacks in 2012. Since then, Al-Shabaab alone has staged more than 80 attacks that have claimed over 600 lives in Kenya. What would inform the success of these attacks? We hypothesize that there are existing linkages between religious extremist groups and local militia, and these linkages in turn give rise to rented terrorism. The concept of rented terror speaks to local militia members carrying out attacks on behalf of terrorist organizations. Under the manifestations of insecurity research stream, we will examine three objectives. 1. We will profile local militia formations and religious extremist groups. 2. We will establish the linkages between local militia and religious extremist groups in enabling or perpetuating acts of terror in the region. 3. We will profile areas in the region that are likely to experience violence as a result of a nexus between local militia and extremist groups.